When you create a new user on your server, you need to assign them a user role. A user role determines the permissions and access of that user. Permissions are what the user is allowed to do on that server, such as submit data, view data, download data, etc. Access determines which forms in server datasets is allowed to do these actions on. For example, the user can access and submit data for form A, but not form B. Customized access requires a multi-team server, but you can still customize permissions on a single-team server. Your server comes with several global user roles, which have access to all groups, but with different permissions. For example, users with the user role data collection only can collect data for all forms, but they can't view any form data, create a form, nor anything else. When you create new teams, the server can create new user roles for you that only have access to that team. For example, users with the user role Team A Data Manager can collect and view data for all forms and datasets in the group belonging to Team A, but they cannot access forms in groups belonging to other teams, and they can't edit forms, manage users, nor anything else. You can also create your own customized user roles that fit your needs. This server has 3 teams. Team A, which has Group A assigned to it, Team B, which has Group B assigned to it, and Team C, which has Group C assigned to it. Let's create a user role that can collect data and view data for Group A and Group B, but with no access to Group C. Under User Roles and Permissions, click Create Role. A user role creation module will appear. Give the user role a title, ID, and a short description. I'll call this user role Teams A and B, Data Collector, and Viewer. Scroll down to Access to Groups. On a single team server, it will say Access Control. From here, you can manage the permissions and access of users with this user role. We want users with this user role to be able to collect and view data for Groups A and B. So I'll click the Group A tab to view the permissions for that group. I want this user role to be able to collect and view data for the forms and datasets in Group A. So I'll select the permissions, can submit responses, and can view individual responses. Notice how the other required permissions for those permissions are selected automatically. This user role should not have any other permissions, so I will not select them. Now, let's do the same thing for Group B. I'll click the Group B tab to view those permissions. Then, I'll select the same permissions, can submit responses, and can view individual responses. This user role should not have any access to Group C, so I'll leave that alone. There are also shared groups. A shared group is any group that does not belong to a team. On a single team server, all groups are shared groups. On this tab, you can customize the permissions for all shared groups. All users will always be able to see forms in all shared groups, but you can restrict the other permissions. For our user role, I'll leave this be, and I won't grant any additional permissions for shared groups. When you're all set assigning permissions, click Create Role. The user role has now been created. If I scroll down to Your Users, I can now add a new user with this user role, or edit an existing user so that they have this user role. You can always change the permissions for a user role later. For example, let's say for the user role we just created, we no longer want them to be able to view data for Group B. Go to that user role and click the triangle on the right, then Edit. Scroll down to Access to Groups, and you can customize the permissions. I'll go to the Group B tab, and I'll deselect Can View Individual Responses and Can View Form Data in Aggregate. To save, click Update Role. Now, users with this user role can still view data for Group A, but not Group B. To learn how to create teams so you can manage access to groups and the forms and datasets in those groups, check out our video, How to Manage Your Teams.